I want to start off by giving a very big thank you to the Thought Riot podcast. They recently reviewed and gave their thoughts on a video of mine that I did about 2 weeks ago regarding the Idaho 4 case and the 4chan posts. Thank you guys very much for the positive things that you said. Thank you for the feedback. I really appreciate that you gave such thoughtful, insightful feedback in such a respectful manner. I love the dynamic between the two of you. For those of you who might have not heard of them, you probably have, but just in case, I've linked to them down in the description for this episode. Now, they were talking about the connection I made between Brian Koberger's job application and his use of the word whilst, and they connected it to the 4chan post where I said those posts are peppered with what are commonly known as British terms, like fresher, mads, the C word that is typically only used towards women here in America, but in Britain and in other countries it's used towards men. But here it's almost exclusively used towards women. And they felt that it was a bit of a stretch, that I thought the use of the word whilst and the overuse of the word I had any significance, and I respect their opinion. I disagree, sir and ma'am, but I love the way you delivered your disagreement, and you made me see things from a new perspective, which I appreciated. Now, just to be clear, it wasn't just the word usage that made me think the suspect could have written those posts. It was also the fact that the person who wrote those 4chan posts said that the timeline was 19 minutes door to door, meaning from the Sigma Chi house to the King Road house and then back again. And I said, I found that timeline very interesting because of how close it was to when the white car is seen on the Linda Lane footage driving into the area and when it's heard leaving. You know, is it exactly 19 minutes? No. But we don't know, what is he counting from? What is he starting? What is he starting from as soon as he entered a certain street, from when he parked, whatever. But there's more to it. And I have to, again, thank the Thought Riot podcast because they made me think of it. So we've got this 19-minute window that's included in the 4chan post. And it's said to include a walk from Sigma Chi to King Road and back, which means that at least 6 to 8 of those minutes, because the Sigma Chi house is pretty close to the King Road house. You know, didn't one of them say, that you could see into Kaylee's room or Maddie's room from one of the David's rooms? I'm not quite sure. But walking distance, it looked like maybe 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes-ish, which would mean that, 6 to 8 of those 19 minutes would be walking, which would leave, let's say, about 10 to 12 minutes to commit the actual crime. I actually just took a moment to Google how far is the Sigma Chi house to the King Road house. And I came up with a map that I'll show you here. Now, whoever wrote this Reddit post, and it doesn't mean, I'm going to move this out of the way because I know how distracting my curls are to some of you. Now, this Reddit post, whoever wrote this, they're saying it was about 5 minutes between the Sigma Chi house and the Idaho 4 house, which would mean 8 to 10 of those 19 minutes were spent walking, which would leave 10 to 11 minutes. Am I doing my math? Am I gazintas right? So if 10 minutes are for walking, there's 10 minutes for the crime. And if it's 8 minutes for walking, there's 12 minutes. So 10 to 12 minutes, which is roughly what it was, at least for the crime itself. But here's the thing that got me thinking. How many people, if you ask them, how long do you think it would take 2 people to murder 4 sleeping college students with a knife? Most people would probably, they'd give an answer, but But most people would probably give an answer, but also say, well, they would ask for more information. They would ask for more details, more context. And when I asked people this, a number of people did say, well, it depends. I mean, what was this? What was going on? You know, they just wanted more information, which we didn't have at that point. We didn't know if there was a fight in the house. We didn't know if there was a struggle. We didn't know any of that. But most people, it ranged. It went from one person said 8 minutes, and the next person said 30, and someone else said 30 minutes. So it ranged between 80 and 30 minutes, which is a pretty big window. So it's eerie to me that the person who wrote that 4chan post would allot about 10 to 12 minutes for those murders. Because most people, I would think, I don't know that most people would guess that, to murder 4 people, 10 minutes. I mean, that's a big part of the conversation now, isn't it? Like, how could one person have done all of that in 9 minutes? And so they're thinking, well, it must have been 2 people. Well, sure, now that we know the timeline, we think, oh, God, 9 to 10 minutes? It must be one or 2 people. But we didn't know the timeline then. We didn't know anything. And yet this person who wrote the 4chan post gave a time frame that would allot about 10 to 12 minutes for the murders themselves. And I just don't think most people, some people might, I just don't think most people would know, would be able to say that, would say, oh, 10 minutes. I would think the average would be like, I don't know, like 20 minutes. You know, if there's a struggle, which we didn't know if there was or wasn't yet, I would think most people would think it would be in the 15 to 20 minute range. Not in the 10-minute range. And that made me feel even more suspicious about, could the suspect have written that? Because who else would know? Who else would know that the crimes were committed in such a short time frame? So I realize I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here. I realize that, but stay with me. So let's say you're not the suspect and you're writing that post to screw over the 2 Davids because you don't like them. Wouldn't you maybe be a little bit more generous with the time frame? Because you would want people to believe it. And how many people have a very hard time currently now believing this timeline of 10 to 12 minutes or 9 minutes or whatever it is? People are having a very hard time believing it, and they're saying there must be multiple people. If you were going to make up a lie, you'd want it to be believable, right? How many people would be like, yeah, I could see that in 10, 15 minutes? It's possible. Like I said, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. I know that. My critical thinking mind is going. The only person who would use the accurate timeline, knowing it wasn't that believable, I would think would be the suspect, because I always felt as though he wrote that post to brag about the timeline. So it would be in his best interest not to embellish it, to keep it fairly accurate. Although I will say, 19 minutes is a little too specific for me. You know, when I spoke to the forensic linguist, you know, you have to pay attention to how specific people are. If they're too specific, too many details, that can be a sign of deception. So that 19 minutes is a little too specific. And so, but for me, the average person who's posting on 4chan, I would think the average person, I just don't think would believe that a quadruple murder could be performed in under 15 minutes. I would think if they were going to make it up, they'd at least say it took 20. or maybe even 15. It just doesn't, to me, that post something feels off about it. I think the suspect wrote it. I think he wrote it to brag about the timeline. Whoever the suspect is, I think he wrote it to brag about the timeline. Because I do believe the timeline was roughly around 10-ish minutes. But who would know that? Who would know that it only took about 10 minutes? Only the person who committed the crime. I just don't see your average person guessing 10 minutes. Just my thoughts. So, of course, as I always do, I want to hear from you. How long do you think it would take somebody? Since everyone's talking about this timeline, and how long do you think it would take for one person to do it and for 2 or more people to do it? Do I think it's possible that this crime could have been committed in under 10 minutes? Yeah, I do. If they were sleeping, if they were inebriated, and which means their reaction time and their ability to defend themselves was impaired, if he didn't have to go too far to find the victims, but also if this was somebody that knew what they were doing with that knife, I think he could have incapacitated them very, very quickly before they had a chance to know what was going on, before they had a chance to scream or to yell or to make any noise that would have been jarring enough for people to be disturbed and to call 911. So, do I think it's possible? Yeah. This is, in my mind, this is definitely somebody who I think knew what they were doing, or at least knew how to handle a knife. I want to hear from you. And go check out Thought Riot podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments because I want to see what you guys have to say.